It's a combination of being genuinely excited about the moment we're in.
So I want to take you on a deep dive here through some of the data, and we'll start with the big picture, okay? This is showing you, you've probably heard people talking recently about rare earth.
We didn't talk about the fact that we are still massively reliant on things that we pluck out of the ground for basically everything. We kind of think...
Look, of all of the countries, the industrial power costs are highest in the UK.
It is the Battery Britain 2025 Communications Award. There it is. Presented to Ed Conway. Congratulations for your sterling work in telling stories and letting people know what's happening. So, yeah, I mean,
can I feel that? I want to feel that. Blimey!
I know.
That is extraordinary. Yeah, it's even heavier than I expected.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like I am a big believer in, you know, we're a community of people who make things. I mean, I don't. I'm not a maker of anything. I
feel a bit of a charlatan in that regard.
But I've been on a journey in the last kind of 3-4 years of talking to people, you know, who are and who are a lot of the time quite phlegmatic. They're not salespeople, but they want to make stuff and they want to invent things and come up with new, you know, innovations that make the world a better place. And Britain has always done that kind of thing. And I you know, there's no inherent reason why we can't be big when it comes to whatever the next kind of technology is, whether it's batteries, whether it's kind of net zero and all of the energy transition, whether it's AI. There's so much exciting stuff happening here, and you know, I think it's great that there's an institution that's backing that, and what Richard is doing there sounds just phenomenal. And I mean, I'm honoured to have been recognised for the tiny part that I played to talk about this stuff, and I'm doubly honoured because of the amazing story of the companies and the artisans and the engineers and the people who have made this physical thing, and long may it continue in the UK.
Well, there you are, and I'll on this. I'll put this on LinkedIn because you might know I hang out on LinkedIn now and again. I share your stuff on LinkedIn. I hope I'm okay doing that, but it always gets a great audience because whether it was rare earths, whether it was Carnegie, whether it was recently about Venezuela, what I like about how you explain things is you don't dumb it down, you give the detail, you do it in a succinct way in which people not only understand it but think, well, what can I do about it? What in whatever world I inhabit might I now do to make a difference to that? Because, you know, what are those three things that I think anchors really good storytelling journalism? Informing, educating, and entertaining. You know, as you're wandering across that big set with the huge screen on showing all of that, you know, that's entertaining.
I was going to say, I don't know about that.
Well, you know, okay, you don't tell jokes, but nonetheless, it lands. That's the point, I think, of data and storytelling is, does it land with the audience and will it create some form of response, whether it's just I didn't know that and now I do, or I'm going to do something about that. And that's the stuff.
I think we sometimes underestimate, actually, you know, including my world and TV, we sometimes underestimate the amount of demand, latent demand there is out there, with, you know, in the public for deep, interesting bits of analysis or insight from a world that you might not be familiar with, and to go in depth. And what we're trying to do more of at Sky is more in depth kind of pieces that actually dig beneath the surface. So that's the idea, and that's why. I'm just really delighted to sort of have got this recognition, and there'll be more to come. Both in Sky and also maybe another book at some point. But
tell you what, you heard it here first. Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, it's been a delight meeting you. You know, I've commentated on things that you've done before. We had those interviews when your book came out. Now, I think it's really important. I can only do what I do if I know people like you and others, and try and then weave that into a kind of narrative that makes sense and takes people, like I say, hopefully to a point of doing something about it. So all of that's good. But yeah, keep bringing it on. Thank you very much. Cheers, Ed Conway. There you are. Communications Award 2025.
I know this isn't as good as when you did the thank you on my behalf and played me, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. And now back to the studio. I like to do that.
Welcome to the Battery Britain End of Year Awards and Gala at the Royal Automobile Club on Pall Mall. This evening is all about celebrating the people and the organisations that are making up the UK battery supply chain. We're celebrating our 2025 UK tour, where we've met the people and we've seen the places that are building the UK battery supply chain.
We decided to come and sponsor the annual gala and really congratulate and celebrate a first fantastic inaugural year. This is merely the start. If the UK and the battery sector is really going to kick on, there needs to be an established, predictable forum where people can come together, gather, and really push forward this sector as a whole.
The targets have been set, but we've actually got only 5 to 6 years to build the battery plants, develop a supply chain, and train thousands of people to work in the industry.
It feels like we've almost woken up to the challenge now. We're progressing with the gigafactories and we're advancing with projects. You can see the change and you can see the desire to bring those supply chains to the UK.
It's a pleasure to be here and it's energising to be here. This is about bringing together innovation, it's bringing together investment, bringing together progress. And the atmosphere in the room is buzzing, dare I say, and I know it's a cliche, but it's electric.
It was really good to see all the speakers on stage today, seeing Vicky, seeing the guys from Denton's, seeing Robin from Hariba, where I'm from. It's wonderful coming to an event where you've got an award ceremony. It's nice to see that other companies can recognise other companies for doing the right things in the UK.
For evolving sectors, you need a platform that brings together everybody so that you can exchange ideas and find answers to the problems that you're trying to solve, as well as advertise what you're doing.
Next year we have this emergence of energy storage systems, which is battery demand outside of electric vehicles, and that's exciting. So the beginning of the next phase has just begun.
All the elements of the battery supply chain can benefit from one voice to make Britain prominent in the battery industry.
Sign up now, become a member for 2026 and join us and be a part and take advantage of the network that we've created that is driving the UK battery industry forward.
Ed Conway, it's a thrill to talk to you, to see you, and indeed to listen to you, because I've been doing that for hours and hours, listening on Audible to your book, Material World. So nice to meet you. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, thank you. I'm excited about kind of telling this. I've been sitting on a lot of these little stories for 3 years, really, and as a journalist, you're not used to sitting on stuff. So finally, I get to kind of splurge about it, but in a way the problem is that there's so much in there because it's just not because of any brilliance on my end, more just because it's such a fascinating different set of things to talk about, and so I kind of just feel like I want to talk about it all the time, and it's not just trying to sell my book. I think this stuff is really important.
Well, no, on that point, this isn't going to be a book review. There are plenty of people who are far more competent at that sort of work than that. But I do agree with you. I think it's a really important book. Why? Because I think it starts to put into the public domain a narrative around, let's understand how the world works. I'm going to read something that you wrote, I think, in something else. The inconvenient truth about climate change is that solving it will involve digging, blasting and leaching more minerals from the skin of this planet than ever before. No one much likes to talk about this, but talk about it we must. So can you just give a little bit more of an explanation of that I've just read out, your words? Yeah. Why must we talk about it?
It's not to say we shouldn't do it at all. It's more just to say we already do this. That's the point. Because we don't spend much time thinking about how the world actually works. There are plenty of people who do, and I think there's a wellspring of curiosity about this stuff. But because in the mainstream, we don't talk that much just about the practicalities of how we make stuff and get it out of the ground. We don't talk about the fact that we are still massively reliant on things that we pluck out of the ground for basically everything. We kind of think that we live in this ethereal universe where the only thing that matters is kind of brain power. And of course, brain power is incredibly important. Our ability to come up with ideas is massively important and transformative and part of who we are as human beings. But we do that brain power and we make tools. And a lot of those tools are still physical tools, whether it's from the iron that we get out of the ground, the copper that goes into wiring, the sand that then goes into glass, or indeed into concrete and all of these other things. We are still reliant on the inherent physicality of the world. And the fact, I think, that we don't do as much of that at the moment in developed economies, particularly, we've outsourced a lot of that stuff, particularly in the UK, particularly in Europe, to a slightly lesser extent, but still to a great extent in the US, because it happens out of sight. I feel like, and because there are so few people working within those worlds at the moment, getting stuff out of the ground, converting it into useful products. So, mining, engineering, manufacturing, all of that stuff, because that's a comparatively smaller part of the workforce these days. And a lot of those people, are humble people who keep themselves to themselves. They're not out to try and, sell themselves. They're not out to try and get into politics for the most part, because the world of policy, media is dominated by people who have no connection with that other universe when it comes to making stuff, that material world I'm going on about. I just feel like we don't talk about it enough. So the starting point for, in a way, for what you were quoting, which was kind of a column I wrote while I was researching this, is that if we're not honest about what we do right now and what we rely on right now, which includes loads of mining, far, far more mining than we've ever done before, not just for fossil fuels, by the way. Fossil fuels is one segment of it. But if we're not honest about how we actually get the world we're reliant on now, then how are we going to be honest about the world that we want to have in the future? And that's part of the kind of the uncomfortable truth of what we're going through right now. No one, very few people disagree that we need to try and clean things up. But if we're going to clean things up, we need to be honest about where we're starting from and where we're going to get to and how we can do it most pragmatically. That's the important thing.
Right. Well, on that point, what I see as an electric vehicle advocate or a clean technology advocate, or whatever people would like to think I am or I think of myself, is that it's only now when we're needing lithium, when we're needing cobalt, graphite, when we're needing manganese, does it seem that there's a negative narrative towards mining, whereas, as you rightly say, we've been doing it, well, literally for centuries, for all mankind almost. So
we've been doing it forever.
Yeah. So why is it that only now are we getting these revelations, if you like, come to the fore, and they're always part of a negative narrative rather than a realistic one, saying, well, look, if you want to have turbines, if you want to have solar panels, if you want to have EVs, where do you think this stuff comes from? Yeah. What's driving that, do you think?
I think for a lot of people, they see what we're going through right now and they feel unnerved by it and nervous about it. And a lot of people are looking and saying, well, maybe it's not quite as straightforward as we have been told it was going to be. And I think that's true. I think a lot of the way that this has been depicted by politicians and to some extent by campaigners is that it was going to be easy and it was going to be completely win-win. But the reality, as anyone who's actually working within these sectors understands, is that, engineering stuff is tough, it's complicated. And there's thermodynamics that we're pushing up against here, because we're going from very dense sources of energy, like oil, to things which are much less dense, like getting wind power and putting it into batteries or putting it into hydrogen. That's much more inefficient. So there are kind of some hard realities of how difficult this is going to be. And I think for a lot of people, when they see the fact that it involves lots more mining, things like lithium, things like cobalt, they look at it and they say, aha, look, it wasn't going to be so easy. You told us it was going to be easy, not going to be easy. But I don't think that's a reason not to be doing this stuff. It's just a reason to be honest about the challenges we're facing, and let's try and do it in a way that is more sustainable this time around. Because I think that's the thing. We've been mining for millennia. We've been getting copper out of the ground for millennia. But because we've been doing it for so long, it's like people don't really think that much about the destruction and the dirtiness of what we've been doing in the past when it comes to that stuff. But what we are doing now in the future is we're having to mine a suite of different metals. We're having to mine so much more nickel than we ever have done before. We're having to go for far more lithium. Lithium was never really mined in industrial quantities. We're having to do that for the first time. So the fact that there's a novelty to it, I think, makes some people think, well, hang on, this is dirty. Why are we doing it? But the reality that I hope is depicted in the book is to say, this is a continuation of something we have been doing forever. The difference this time around is I think we are a bit more cognizant of the kind of, the implications and the externalities, as economists would call them, the dirtiness that we can cause. So hopefully in this transition, we can be more open-eyed to all that stuff. Because frankly, we didn't think about that stuff as much in the Industrial Revolution in the past, not because of, any malice. It just wasn't, the science wasn't there. So,
yeah.
It's so I think but I think the reality is a lot of people are looking at this and they're saying, hang on, no one told us it was going to be so difficult, so expensive, all of that stuff.
Yeah, you're so right. And I'm wondering, at any time in the past, civilizations, either ancient or modern, has the population been aware, been cognizant, your word, of the reality of how they live, where that we're either digging it up or we're growing it, those two very simplistic aspects of where everything comes from. Has there been a time when cultures or societies have been aware of that? I mean, we live in the modern age of mass communication. Seemingly you can know anything anywhere at the touch of a button. But in ironically, do we know less now as a society than perhaps people knew in the past?
I think we know much less. I think we know much less. And again, it's not through any fault of anyone. It's because so few people are working within the sectors that get stuff out of the ground and bring it to us. So, in agriculture, it used to be that basically half of the population, sometimes more, just over a century ago in the US, it was basically half the population worked in agriculture. Now it's just about 1% and a bit. So that was go from an area where everyone understood what it meant to get stuff out of the ground, to find fertilizer, to plow fields, to use steel, to actually turn what we have in the earth into something that we can consume. Same thing for manufacturing. There was a far greater proportion of people who used to work in manufacturing. There was a far greater proportion of people who used to work in mining. It is a wonderful thing, frankly, that there are nowadays so few people working in those sectors, because it was tough work. It was incredibly tough work, and it was dangerous as well in mining and in manufacturing as well, and it still is in those sectors. So it's great that there's so few people working in there. It's great that I inhabit this other ethereal world. However, the fact I think that we have gone to an era where we understand less about it, and therefore just are a bit less realistic about the realities of this place. And so to some extent, this journey I've been on in the book, there's nothing new in there, but the merest fact that for a lot of people when they read it, they'll be like, blimey, I didn't realize this and I didn't realize that, just shows, I think, how much relearning we could do if we're going to kind of try and be more in tune with the humanity of this world we inhabit. And that humanity is we get stuff out of the ground, we make tools, we use them to make the world a better place. We're just carrying on doing them right now, but sometimes getting those tools out of the ground is a little bit mucky.
Oh, very mucky in some situations. Some of the graphic illustrations you talk about in the book were really eye-popping to me, and I thought I knew quite a lot. I mean, I probably know more than a lot of people, simply because my focus has come through Simon Moores and the Benchmark Mineral team, who analyse a lot of this stuff, the data. I've got to meet with and know people involved in mining, mineral processing, the geopolitics of it all. I've got my head around all of that. So a lot of what you were writing for me resonated very strongly, but I'm thinking of the people that really don't know anything about this. I mean, your point's a really good one about how, yes, we were more connected in the past, because that was what so many people did.
That's what we did.
But they don't know, hadn't really thought of it in that way. It's a very good point. But how in the modern world then do we, given climate change, arguably, well, of course it is the most significant issue of the day and the future, how do we weave this into the conversation, so that it's not just picked up as a negative. Oh, well, I told you, EVs were a bad idea, or I told you all this renewable energy was rubbish. How do we get an intelligent discussion, and the warts and all of it? Let's not sanitize any of it.
It's such a good question, and I spend a lot of time thinking about this, to some extent agonizing over it, because I'm aware that some of the stuff in this book, because it enumerates some of the challenges, people will look at it and will say, oh gosh, well, it's just too hard. Why are we doing this? It's going to be too expensive. It's going to make life too difficult for the next few decades. And what I've said in kind of, in comparison to that, is that it will also be exciting, that there will also be opportunities for us to live, more frugally without it feeling like a sacrifice. But I think if we're not honest about this stuff, we're going to just hit against much more in the way of resistance. I think that's the thing. If you're not honest, and if you're deluding people and yourself about both the nature of what we're facing. So for a lot of people, they want to depict the realities of climate change as something that is literally apocalyptic. Okay, so that is also a form of delusion. It is not apocalyptic. It is very bad in many senses, but calling it, absolutely the end of world is just doesn't seem to accord with any of the science, according to the the IPCC and so on. So there's that side of delusion. But then saying that that this is too difficult, that this is impossible, is also a form of delusion, because there is a path through this. It's just a difficult path, and if we're not honest to people about the fact that it's tough and also exciting, then I think you're just going to lose more and more people as it goes on, and as the realities of that start to hit, because it's going to be kind of expensive. It's expensive to build this stuff. We're going from an era where it was cheap to get oil out of the ground. It was cheap and incredibly energy dense, and it was efficient. And that oil also had this suite of other uses, like plastics, which I know, for all the downsides of plastics, there have been an incredible amount of upsides as well in terms of the sanitation and what they've brought to much of the world. So, and fertilizer, natural gas. Where does fertilizer come from? It comes from natural gas. When you consume basically anything these days, directly or indirectly, apart from a very small fragment, you will be consuming a form of natural gas. And so, understanding that is a helpful start to this, because then it just means that I think we need to go into this with our eyes open. And part of the book is, it wasn't intended to be a book like this. It was just intended to be a book that was satisfying my curiosity about how the world actually kind of happens. But yeah, you just then end up going down these wormholes that are totally fascinating, which also have some resonance for where we are right now politically.